Welcome everyone, and welcome to today's Tamron Top 5. My name is Ken Hubbard. I'm the Field Service Manager from Tamron USA, and I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite types of photography, and that's landscape photography. So today's topic is 5 tips to improve your landscape photography. Some of the topics I'm going to be talking about is maximize your depth of field while creating depth in your images. Use leading lines to guide the viewer's eyes through the image. Slow down shutter speed to create movement. Bad weather and good light means more emotion in your images. Change your point of view for a different look. So let's get started on number 1. Maximize depth of field while creating depth in your image. With landscapes, usually to create some depth, you want a foreground subject, a midground subject, and a background subject. This is on the island of Kauai. This is Hanalei Bay, and a storm was coming in from the left to right. And the interesting light was creating depth in its own, with highlights and shadows. But I put this plant in the foreground and the mountains in the background. But I want to get both in focus to also, so you can see all of that. So what I needed to do here is actually stop down my aperture. I shot this image at about f16. Maximizing, giving me the largest depth of field. My focus point was also that plant right here behind this foreground subject. And the reasoning why is because depth of field works in that 1/3, 2/3 ratio. If I focused here on these plants, chances are my mountains in the background would be out of focus. And if I focused on the mountains, there's a chance these would be out of focus. So focusing slightly behind those plants on that plant right there allowed me to get the foreground and the background in focus. Next image is the Alabama Hills, just outside of the town of Lone Pine, California. Here again, maximizing my depth of field to create depth in my image as well. Here I wanted Mobius arch, this nice beautiful arch to be in focus and the background in focus as well. Again, shooting at an aperture of f16 to maximizing how much I get in focus. If I focused at f2.8, I would have to either focus on the background and have Mobius arch out of focus, or Mobius arch in focus and the background out of focus. If you notice here, I use the 15 to 30. That also helps maximizing your depth of field. Shooting at a wider angle gives you that larger depth of field to work with. It also plays tricks with you. This particular arch, shooting at that wide angle of 15 millimeters, makes it look like it's a really gigantic arch. When all is said, I'm about 6 feet tall and I would have to get down on my knees to actually crawl through this. Also, what wide angle does to give some depth to this image, it makes that foreground look bigger, like I said, and it stretches that background away from that foreground subject. So that creates a little depth as well. Here is the Grand Canyon as a storm is coming in. Again, using that wide angle to maximize my depth of field. So this foreground rock, which I'm standing on, is in focus, and the background where the storm is already hitting the canyon is in focus. My focus point here is on that plant right there. Again, worrying about the 1/3, 2/3 rule. So in all this area in the foreground is in focus, as well as the background's in focus. So think about depth of field with landscapes. When you have a nice foreground subject, midground subject, and background subject, you want to maximize your depth of field to keep it all in so the viewer can see it. And to do that, stop down that aperture. Use leading lines. Leading lines are a great way for your viewer to be led through the scene. it could be led to something or it could be led to nothing. It could go to an infinity point. It could go to a horizon. Here, this is one of the ice caves in Iceland. And I am using two sets of leading lines here. Actually, the leading lines in the ice itself, all those dark areas against the white, create lines that force the viewer to look at the foreground and then get drawn to the highlight in the background, as well as this little stream that's going through this cave. That's a nice little line that it carved right through that ice cave. So, leading lines draw you into this highlight here. Again, shot with the 15 to 30 and being a little bit on the mysterious side because this actually looks like a big ice cave. Once again, I'm down on my hands and knees. If I couldn't even stand anywhere near straight up in this cave. It was so low and so small. But again, using a 15 to 30 millimeter at 15 millimeters really made quite a difference. In this case, the leading line is the sand dune in Death Valley. This is the Mesquite Flats sand dune in Death Valley, and I used this line coming in from the corner, leading you to the sun, and made a little nice sunburst out of the sun in this case. With leading lines, a lot of times it's nice to have them come from a corner or close to the corner and not the sides or the center. Not saying you can't, but with some scenes like this one, it's nice to have it come from the corner. And here, instead of just a highlight in a cave, it goes to the sunburst. And to create that sunburst, again, I stopped down my aperture to f16, force the light through a smaller opening, creates those bursts of light. Here, kind of opposite of what I just said before, your initial leading line is that the roadway with this yellow dotted line out in Nevada. This is near Area 51, long straight road, which I absolutely love in general to shoot roads, especially ones like this. But then to have that storm come in and your leading line of the road going straight down the middle towards that storm. What kind of balances this out when I have a situation like this where I know I'm going to have a leading line, this orange line go down the middle, I kind of make the white lines of the road come from the corner so it draws your eye out to the sides as well and then comes down straight into the heart of that storm. So use leading lines, guide the viewer through your image, and they can be anything. It can be a rope laying on the ground. It could be a set of benches in a park that curve throughout the park, leading the viewer to something. So look for leading lines in all your images as well. Capture movement. A lot of times when doing wildlife or sports, you want to freeze movement. But with landscapes, you want to freeze movement at times, like say trees. If it's a windy day, sometimes it might be distracting if you use a slow shutter speed and they're soft. But in the case of streams and other things in landscapes, movement is good, and the softer, the more movement that is captured makes the image even better. This was shot at approximately 1/15 of a second, a pretty slow shutter speed, but still fast enough to slightly freeze the water as it's coming down this waterfall in Childs Park, Pennsylvania. To make this a little bit better, I actually put a neutral density filter in front of my lens to let in less light, which allowed me to slow my shutter speed down to 4 seconds. And to me, having that wispy, soft, cloud-like water is a little bit more pleasing to the viewer's eye. So if you look at 1/15 of a second, multiple seconds. You can see that. So what happens is that movement in the water becomes softer. The longer it goes, the softer that water becomes. So, a good little thing to have with you if you're a landscape photographer, one is a circular polarizer. That will help because it's about 1.5 to 2 stops of light, but neutral density filters can make it go even slower and slower depending on the type of light you have. Here it's another small little waterfall, and this is in Bushkill Falls. I like to, sometimes it's about including the whole waterfall, like Child's Park, where you have a nice S curve in it. But this waterfall was actually 2 levels, and to shoot the whole waterfall just didn't quite look right because there was a break in the middle. So sometimes it's about just taking a piece of that subject, a piece of that landscape that's in front of you to make it look a little bit better. And again, once again, I was down to approximately about a 5-second exposure with this one to get that really soft kind of look to it, almost a screen or a veil type of look to the image. And like I said before, it doesn't matter if you're shooting in the middle of the day or at night or whenever. You can get multiple second exposures. This is Pfeiffer Beach in California at about 11 a.m. on a bright, partly cloudy, partly sunny day. And when the sun came out, it was super bright. But yet I was getting 20-second exposures here, and that's why the water looks like it's iced over. I was using a 10-stop neutral density filter and stopping down my aperture to f16 to let in as little light with the aperture, but also let in less light by using a 10-stop neutral density filter. So about 20 seconds here is how long this shutter speed was going. So think about that. Trick people with your images. You know, obviously it's midday, but why and how is that water so soft? You know, slowing down that shutter speed, creating movement in your images. Weather and light. One thing about being a landscape photographer or doing landscape photography, sometimes weather means good light. Bad weather, storms, just after storms, as storms are coming in, create such dramatic light. Like the Grand Canyon image I showed you before. That storm was coming towards me, creating that unbelievable pink light. But weather doesn't always have to be stormy. Sometimes it's just about fog. Fog creates this beautiful soft light over its subjects, and this is in Alaska. One of the fjords we went into had this amazing glacier. To me, it looks like a sleeping dragon in a way, with its head kind of right here, and then its leg right here, and the tail going off this way. And the fog just adds to it this beautiful, beautiful soft light, just bright enough to create some nice contrast, but soft enough so you see all the real nice details, not blowing out any highlights, not too dark of shadows. So use fog. It's a great, great way to capture some really moody images. Then storms. This is in Canyonlands, just after a storm. As we were driving through, scouting for a workshop, the clouds started to break. The sun was going down. So you have that late afternoon, really nice warm light and incredibly dramatic post-storm light as the clouds start breaking through and the light starts streaming through. What I do is I always have a couple of weather apps on my cell phone so I can track the weather, and an hour or two before it looks like it's going to break in the area I am in, I'm out scouting around, looking, driving, because you never know what might happen. And in a case like this, if you do that, always have a camera ready. Don't have your camera in your bag, no lens on it. I tend to put a all-in-one, and you see what I have here is an 18-400 Tamron all-in-one on my camera body. So basically all I have to do is pick it up, run out of the car, start shooting, because moments like this do not last very long. This lasted for about 5 minutes and the light was gone. So be ready, have a lens on your camera at all times. Then sometimes weather is not always natural, and this is not weather at all. This is a fire that is happening close to Yosemite National Park. Every morning we would wake up to this dense, dense smoke inside the park. And at first you think, wow, this is just not going to be good for photography. It's just horrible. But then as the sun comes up, it creates this creepy, eerie, moody, orange glow throughout the whole valley. And that's when you're like, well, yeah, this is actually going to make something nice out of this. Something completely different than, your average sunrise or sunset. So even if it's not necessarily weather causing the interesting and strange light, get out there. And like this case, it was a fire that was outside of the park that created this amazing light every single morning. Change your perspective. There's a couple of ways to do that. You can, stand on top of something, get down low to the ground, side to side, whatever, or it's also changing your perspective using different focal lengths. Here's your typical, what I talked about first, is changing your point of view and your perspective, looking at things differently. This is Zion National Park and the Virgin River. I'm down on my knees in the stream, in the river, about 6 inches off the water with the 15 to 30 here. And basically what I'm doing is I want to get that rock on the left-hand side in the frame, as well as Angel's Landing and Observation Point, all in the same frame. So I'm getting down low to maximize some of this reflection, make it look bigger and grander, this river, than it actually is, and then just creating a different angle and a different point of view to the image. I'm also trying to minimize the sky in this image. There were no clouds. There was no depth to it because of clouds, so I didn't want too much focus on the sky itself. I wanted to focus on the river, then Angel's Landing and Observation Point. So sometimes you got to get down low. It's always good to have some sort of knee pads or cushioning with you if you're going to be out in an area, but wouldn't have done much good in this case because I was getting nice and wet being in the river there. Focal length makes a big difference in perspective as well. This is Red Rock Crossing, and that is Cathedral Rock in the background. And here is an image shot with the 15 to 30, the Tamron 15 to 30 at 15 millimeters. A little bit of a reflection in this little pool off to the side over here. You can see Cathedral Rock, but the foreground just kind of takes up too much. It takes away from the image. So I changed my perspective and all with a different focal length, but also changed my perspective and I moved a little bit as well. I got closer to that front pool area and went to 26 millimeters. What that did is, because wide angle stretches things out, even that slight change from 15 millimeters to 26 millimeters created a little bit more compression, brought Cathedral Rock closer. Me getting a little closer to the ground gave me a better reflection in the water. So this is a combination of both changing where I'm shooting from and focal length to create a better image. Here, this is about focal length. Again, what does wide angle do? It stretches things out. So if I was standing next to Balance Rock in Arches National Park and shot this with, say, 50 millimeters or 35 millimeters, Balance Rock would look impressively big, but Turret Arch, which is way back here in the background, would be tiny and not even seen. You wouldn't even recognize it's there. So this is actually shot at 200 millimeters. And what 200 millimeters does, it creates compression. It brings the background and foreground closer together. So this way, the rock, a Balance Rock, still looks impressively big, but it draws that background closer, and now you can see Cathedral Rock in the frame as well. So choosing the right focal length by what you have in the scene is incredibly important, especially how you want something to look. Do you want things to look closer together or further away? And sometimes you're forced into using a different lens that you normally would. We were in Apalachicola and we were shooting wildlife as the sun started to set along the river, and there were local fires going on in the state parks, controlled burns, and all that particulate was going up into the air, and as the sun goes down, it turned this incredible orange. And I shot this at 600 millimeters with the 150 to 600, making the sun look a little bit bigger, the trees and bushes in the foreground that are silhouetted more on the same plane. It created this interesting flat kind of look to it, that everything is on the same plane because of such a long telephoto. Even the clouds look like they're on the same plane as the sun and the trees themselves. So, with that being said, I want to thank you for joining me for today's 5 at 5. Here's my information if you want to contact me or you have any questions, both on Facebook, Instagram, and my website. So, thanks for joining me.